All right, welcome to meeting 46, February 15th, 2022. Glad to see everyone here. We have a code of conduct you can find in the agenda, which I'm pasting into Zoom. If you haven't checked it out, please do. I don't see any new faces, but if anybody wants to reintroduce themselves, feel free. Let's see, I notified in Slack channel and we are recording. All right. We don't have any show and tell items that are on the agenda. Anybody have any ones they want to bring up right now? All right. No problem. Let's move on to topics. Nicholas, you want to go?
Yes. So can you hear me? Perfect.
Yep, we got you.
Usually I hear myself with my headphones. That's why it's a little iffy today. So I was looking at the integration we have with Kubernetes with Tinkerbell, and I could see that in the sandbox, we essentially have a pointer which says quick start guide for Kubernetes coming soon. And then we have the K8s sandbox, which is static manifest. So I was thinking if there would be a desire, because I heard in the past we would like to set up a Helm chart. I don't know if there's any work that was done on that already. I think Dan might have looked into that in the past, but I'm not entirely sure. I've not found any issues that have this as a topic, and I would love to take that on because I run my workloads mainly on Kubernetes. So it would be nice to have a Helm chart, and then I was even thinking about some things already, how to implement that. For example, take some of these shell scripts and put them in an init container, so that like the bootstrap with a Helm chart would essentially just be Helm install, and it would pull hook via init container and do a lot of this more automatically, and then potentially having like a happy path where you could install it on top of something like K0s or K3s, and then get up the Tinkerbell stack without having to have any virtualization or anything.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome. I'm not familiar. I think maybe someone else, maybe Jason might know of other people that have done Helm charts, but this sounds amazing.
Yeah, as far as I know, this has been a long time to-do list, but nobody's yet had time to kind of run with it. There's been kind of more important things to kind of deal with for everybody. So I think it would be awesome if you went ahead and tackled this and got us rolling with it. Thank you.
Sure. I think it's pretty cool already that we have some manifests and then could use them as a base and then build off that. So I'll see what I can come up with.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicholas. Any other thoughts or comments or questions for Nicholas? Right on. Okay, moving on. I have a topic here. So proposal 22 has been out for a bit. I can post the link here in the Zoom chat. And as part of that, just last week, a new iPixie Dust repo landed in Boots. So all of our iPixie builds and things are in its own repo, which creates some nice, hopefully some nice mental models that we can consume the complexity of Boots a little bit better. And as part of that, just yesterday, I created a new DHCP repo. It has the very creative name of DHCP, but that name is not set in stone by any means. So I wanted to just bring it up. If anybody's interested in naming or contributing, I'm going to start throwing in quite a bit of code here pretty quickly. Feel free to just join in and get involved. I do see somebody said, is core DHCP relevant? That's a great question. It is relevant. I've looked at and used that code base quite a bit. I'm not comfortable with and just integrating it. I think one of the challenges too is I don't know how well it's built as a library. And so the importing of it is not exactly straightforward. The last time I checked too, I think they just recently fixed this, but it wasn't cross-platform compatible. And so there was some concerns in different platforms. Boots right now with its own DHCP, you can run it anywhere. It seems to be pretty lightweight enough. So I did look into it if that is any consolation, but I did steer away from it.
Okay, that's cool. I just looked into DHCP servers in the past because I had this funny idea of basically putting DHCP leases into Kubernetes and then using that to create hardware and doing auto enrollment and so on. Which is why I was kind of looking at building my own DHCP server. But if Boots is now being drilled up anyway, I think that's a pretty cool thing. That then in the future there could come some plugins or whatever model you're going with. That's really cool.
Yeah, 100%. Go ahead, Jason. Oh, you might be on mute. Sorry.
Thank you. I think my question is, and it kind of relates to the next topic, is how is this going to affect how we release the components of Tinkerbell? Will this be kind of versioned separately? Is it something that's just imported as a library and we can kind of have separate versioning? You know, how would we kind of deal with this as part of like a greater release?
Yeah, great question. Its main goal is a library, and so Boots Repo proper will be importing it. And so I think it's kind of one step away. It could probably kind of hide in that level, and we wouldn't necessarily need to version it together. We could. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I don't see it being a high constraint. For example, the iPixie Dust repo, yeah, it's just in the Go mod and Boots. I don't know how much value we get by tagging that all the way down. Yeah, Marcus says version everything, which yes, that's fair. So we could bring it along. Yeah, I could go either way. But if it like causes like, okay, more challenge of like, I got to add this, I think we can wait maybe, but I don't, yeah, that's kind of my take, but anybody else have any other thoughts or opinions?
Just for my understanding, so when you say like modularizing it, so currently the separate components of Boots are not in separate packages in your package folder, or okay, fair. So maybe migration path could be to just put in one repository in the beginning into Boots and then put it in separate packages and then version it along with Boots, because that could reduce the overhead. I mean, I'm just thinking because like when I develop new Go programs, that's usually what I do, have it in my package path. I can still import it like an external library, but it makes it easier to handle the whole thing, especially in terms of release management until you can version it separately.
Yeah, that's a great point. I did take that into consideration when I proposed the breaking out. The challenge that I ran into is I was optimizing for decreased like mental model and complexity of what Boots does, and release process was lower on that list. And so it wasn't as optimized. This kind of idea and design wasn't optimized for that per se. The other thing that was I heavily relied on was Boots. There's been a couple of people that have tried, that I know of at least personally, that have tried to kind of come in and refactor Boots as is. And just because of the way it was written, it was real difficult to say, hey, let me make a clear distinction between different things and create just like general, like you said, in Go, where you can create different packages for different things. It was, so the history kind of made it difficult to get this. And then the last thing I'll bring up real quick is, it was a challenge where you would want to make a small change to like, oh, I want to update a logging message or a DHCP option or something like that. And then you had to rebuild iPixie like every single time. And so anyways, there was a lot of considerations. I tried to document some of them in the proposal, but ultimately I went with this idea of multiple repos and distinct libraries, knowing that there would be trade-offs. So yeah, I apologize right now. I know releasing will be a challenge, but I unfortunately didn't optimize for that. So, but it's a great point.
I think it's perfectly fine to kick the can down the road a little bit on getting things versioned properly for that, since it's just being used as a library and it's not going to affect things like updating Sandbox or anything like that. You know, we'll want to do it, you know, eventually, but you know, I think it's fair right now to get the refactors in place and then worry about the actual versioning semantics of it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've looked at in the past that could make these things a little easier for like the transition period is Dependabot, and then have Dependabot submit automatic PRs. So if one repository changes, I've been playing around with that a bit. There's a little bit of like permission thingy that can be a bit iffy because you need, yeah, basically credentials to allow it if you want to merge it automatically, the PRs, that is. But other than that, Dependabot is incredibly useful for Go modules, I found.
I believe we use that in some repos for security updates, like Dependabot will auto PR. But yeah, for dependencies against other libraries, that's a cool idea I haven't thought of. Yeah, feel free to throw a PR in or something if that makes sense, or if you're interested. I would vote that you work on the Kubernetes Helm charts before that, but that's up to you.
I'm not sure where iPixie Dust versioning would where it crops up, but it's easy to slap an O.1.0 on something using semantic versioning. We're already, you know, I think we're already sold on Semver. We've said it in other places. So if we slap, I just checked to see if you had maybe copied over all of the boots history into the divided projects, and it looks like you didn't. So iPixie Dust has a history that starts mid-December 2021. So it's not like we can just inherit the boots Semver tags that we got from the sandbox. So I don't think we could say hop to O.6.0 in iPixie Dust, but we can start at O.1.0 and we could slap that on right now and create a release that says this is the version that was extracted from boots on such and such a date, boots version O.6.0 at such and such a date. And then that gives us a frame of reference for a month from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, when we do make the next release, to say what has changed from there to there. It's no harm in doing it now and risk in not doing it until much later. The same risk that we saw with the rest of Tinkerbell not having versioning for 1.5 years.
Yeah, I like that. I'll put that on my list, my short-term list to get to that. I'll maybe end up pinging you, Jason, but I'll probably just try and copy paste basically all the stuff you've already done into the iPixie Dust, and then yeah, I'll try and tag it O.10. Thanks, Marcus. All right, any other thoughts, comments, questions around that? Sweet. All right, Jason, you want to go?
Yeah, I just wanted to give everybody an update. I think I casually said that I was going to work on trying to update Sandbox like the last community meeting. And in the time being, I noticed that Marcus had gotten the Semver tags for everything, but we still weren't publishing images that were tagged with the Semver. So I've started with, I think it was the Boots repo, and Manny's also doing some similar work on trying to improve the GitHub Actions workflows so that they can work on forks and that sort of thing. So I'm collaborating with him on, you know, making sure that those two changes can kind of land in a graceful manner, and then I'll move on to the other component repositories. And then at that point, we'll be able to bump up Sandbox to actually using the latest versions and actually referencing the semantic version tags for the 0.7.0 release. So looking forward to that. Hoping to make some progress on it this week, but it all depends on, you know, how things shake out with trying to do all that sort of stuff. So maybe another week or two before it actually lands, but the goal is this week.
Did I catch
Yeah,
in
go
there
ahead.
that Oh, sorry. Did
Sorry.
I interrupt?
Nope, go
Yeah,
ahead, Marcus.
You go. All right. Did I miss in there? Did I hear in there that the versions of that the existing boots Docker image, like or Docker images where they exist, will be tagged based on sandbox? Because I'm realizing that I probably missed that step. Like I did tag GitHub things, but I didn't tag Docker images.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to retroactively do it. I didn't see much of a point since the older, sandbox was referencing the SHA tags anyway. But going forward, the idea is similar to how we're tagging the sandbox repo for releases now. Is all you would have to do is push a tag to the individual component repos, and when that's done, it'll automatically generate the release notes diff using the GitHub automated release notes, and then it'll also copy the SHA-based image for associated with that build, push that up as the semantic version tag for that component. So it'll be a going forward type thing rather than a retroactive thing.
Gotcha.
One question in this regard. I've done that in the past a bit. I think I've tried it. You can trigger workflows between repositories, and then maybe, I mean, this is like a nice to have, but once a component updates, automatically updating the sandbox.
Yeah, I think we would probably want to have better testing in place before we do that. Right now, I think the testing that we have in the sandbox isn't functioning. So anytime you update the sandbox, it's a manual test process right now. But I think if we do get that better testing in place for sandbox, that's definitely something that we can do, because we'd want to look at eventually being able to version all of the different subcomponents individually, and then just letting sandbox kind of accept those over time. So that type of process would work really nicely for that as well.
One question that's slightly related to like release management and in relation to the Helm chart. Should I submit it against the sandbox or against sandbox Kubernetes? Is there a possibility or an idea of maybe merging the two together?
I think there was longer term. There wasn't a lot of compatibility between how things were with the original Kubernetes sandbox and with the regular sandbox. So that's why we didn't there. I don't have any opposition to having the Helm chart live with the normal sandbox, and we can deprecate the existing Kubernetes sandbox, if that makes sense. It's up to what everybody wants as a community. So we probably want to pose it as a proposal and discuss it so that folks that aren't present at the meeting can provide their feedback. Because I think the initial feedback is we didn't want to conflate too many things, but we've had kind of a turnover in folks that are involved with the project since then. So the consensus might be different this time.
Yeah, I can see that holding up, risking updating of sandbox because we haven't updated the Kubernetes side yet. But the alternative or the opposite view of that is that we're guaranteeing that Kubernetes is working with the latest sandbox release. And that seems like a big win.
Yeah.
So wait, I'm not sure I got this right now. So against sandbox or K8s sandbox?
Oh, if Kate sandbox was moved into sandbox, then we'd have like one universal sandbox version number, as opposed to having whatever. I think Kate sandbox is probably on version right now, and then a version sandbox.
Yeah, I think the thing would be is throw together a proposal in the proposals repo so that we can get the larger community to provide feedback on the idea. From my perspective, I like the idea of combining them, like Marcus says, and make sure that everything's up to date in one place. But I don't want to necessarily try to speak on behalf of others in the community, especially considering it was contentious in the past. I don't necessarily know that it will be anymore, but
Okay. So yeah, I guess, yeah, that goes into a proposal, and then I will just submit the Helm chart against the sandbox directly. to reduce administrative overhead, I guess.
Seems reasonable to me. Thanks.
That last comment has me wondering about, because there's also a good reason to have the sandbox be broken up. Like the Terraform sandbox could be broken up from the Vagrant, from the Docker, and yeah, I guess that makes the documentation hard to. We're trying to document and keep in sync too many different deployment options at one time. Maybe if we broke them up, we would have to maintain them all independently. They could all be independently versioned, independently coordinated. Yeah, it's definitely a topic for broader discussion, but it's painful. We started with everything living inside of Tink inside of a deploy directory, and then we moved it all out into this sandbox project. I've run into a lot of problems. There was the shared setup.sh script. I think Jacob, you did a bunch of refactoring around that too. And just having Terraform deployments and Docker deployments and Vagrant deployments all depend on that one shared file meant that they would all break. Like Vagrant would get updated without consideration of Terraform. So that's kind of why the sandbox is a good thing, because we can test them all in one shot. We have to do a better job of probably keeping the documentation up to date with that. Does that mean that we move the documentation into the sandbox project too? No, it doesn't. So, yeah,
So I guess what I'm hearing along the lines is also more testing, more automated testing, probably. I mean, I'm no expert with Vagrant specifically, but I think I could conjure up some tests for the Helm chart via KND or K3D or something like that. So that should be doable.
Yeah, that would be amazing. There's been some long-standing tickets around testing. There's some old Go code that did some Vagrant stuff, but we don't run it anymore. But yeah, I think, yeah, I'll +1 all those things that you said, Marcus. Some great thoughts there. Last thing I'll add on that, there is a ticket out there too about Ansible, if I'm not mistaken, like Podman and Ansible deployment. And there were questions about like where that should go. And I think I might have asked like, yeah, send us over whatever you got and we can see if we can find a place for it. But it does bring up more questions about like another repo, same repo, but yeah. I can't speak to kind of the structure if it's helpful of the sandbox. It's meant to be broken up at the moment, at least, into some modular parts where you do have kind of infrastructure providers. So you've got Vagrant, Terraform kind of separated on their own, and then you kind of have the stand-up of the Tinkerbell stack in its own place in terms at the moment, Docker Compose. So there is some composability tried to build into it. It is a hard dance because obviously like once you throw Kubernetes in there, some of this composability might not make sense. You could have, theoretically, you could have a Terraform provider that spun up Equinix Metal, but it did Kubernetes and then applied these Helm charts. And so that is one option where you can have some kind of shared code that does make a single repo maybe make a little bit more sense. But again, these are all trade-offs in terms of how we architect them. And so I'll echo also what Jason said. I think a proposal just to make sure everybody's on page with that is good.
I'm just thinking that for like some of the testing, we could potentially use multipass, because I had some issues getting Vagrant up and running because of some virtualization settings. I have heard about multipass, but I don't know if that's a better option.
So the biggest challenge we're going to have with testing is that we can't really do virtualized testing within GitHub Actions because we can't do it without self-hosted runners, basically, because the GitHub managed runners do not enable nested virtualization. So as soon as you try to like run the workflow, bring the worker up and try to boot it up, it's going to go excessively slow during the provisioning process, and it's not going to be a really good test signal. So anything that we do, we'll probably have to make sure that we make a self-hosted runner available for that purpose, because otherwise, yeah, we're not going to be able to do too much validation on the testing.
I think I'll put some testing in my backlog because I want to learn a bit more about automated testing, because like I really like the Go code that kind of executed all these commands. And yeah, I kind of want to go into that.
Awesome. Yeah, ping in the community if you want to talk or discuss. That'd be awesome. Thanks. Multipass. I have experience with multipass. One of the challenges with multipass that you do get from VirtualBox is you can get known network setups, right? So you can create network different kind of isolated networks so that when you do spin things up, you can programmatically expect and get the results that you want. With multipass, at least my experience with it, it's a tad bit more difficult, and you can't do any pixie stuff. So like Vagrant VirtualBox, you can do a pixie contain, you got a pixie VM and whatnot, but with multipass, I've never been able to do that. Maybe it's possible, but anyway, so there's some little interesting challenges around that.
A good point, and actually it just reminded me that there's another technology that might make sense in terms of virtualization, because it doesn't really virtualize things. LXD. I've looked at that in the past. I've actually run things on it, also Kubernetes clusters, and I can test if it runs in GitHub runners and GitHub Actions, because that would be pretty cool, because you get pretty much isolated VM instances, because they do kind of C grouping as well.
So one of the challenges that I've found with trying to provide testing is that ideally anything that's running within the CI environment, somebody can replicate locally. And unfortunately, like Vagrant and VirtualBox and/or libvirt seems to be the easy common denominator, because you can run that on Windows, Mac, Linux, whatever you have, and it's not limiting on the contributor side to kind of replicate those tests and be able to troubleshoot. So whatever we kind of come up with, we probably want to make sure that anybody can run, rather than saying, this has to be, run on a Linux system type of thing.
Very good point. I tend to forget Windows a couple of times. Even though I'm on a Windows machine, I am not the biggest fan. I'm living in the subsystem most of the time.
Yeah, right on. Great point. Any other thoughts or comments, questions?
Yeah, I'm kind of scared about the idea that we could end up adding 3 more testing implementation approaches to Sandbox and then end up having to maintain them all, or having them all fall out of service. So it makes me wonder if there's a point coming soon where we start kicking things out of Sandbox, like Terraform implementation. That's great. It lives somewhere else. You go use it there. No guarantees. Go ask those folks, go open issues on their project. What we guarantee with Sandbox is that this implementation is going to work.
So one of the things that I would like to see is if we can get to the point where we have automated testing around what we want to support, we can potentially kick things out that we don't necessarily want to support. But if we have automated testing around and an automated test signal that's actually valid, then anytime we go to make changes to Sandbox, we should have that test signal to say, yes, the test passed, we can go ahead and release this, or we got to resolve the issue. If we spread that out across multiple repos, then we have to have testing across multiple repos. You have to update everything across multiple repos, and it's a much more onerous process to kind of keep everything updated. So I like the idea of, let's get automated testing in place in the centralized spot, and then it's like a one-stop shop. Okay, we want to bump these versions for a release. Oh wait, Terraform's failing, and we got to sort that out before we actually cut the release type of thing.
Yeah, that's fair. If we're going to continue supporting them all, I guess my thought was maybe we can stop saying or stop supporting certain things altogether, like especially if we're adding alternatives in, if we decide that there's other approaches that are more stable or
Very good
more
point.
maintainable.
I guess I should just not procrastinate Vagrant so much.
Awesome. All right, last call. Any other thoughts or questions there, opinions? Sweet. All right. Let's see, last topic we have. I apologize. Abhinav, Hinav? Am I saying your name right? Sorry. Abhinav, sorry. Go for it.
No, you got it. Yeah, so I just wanted to briefly discuss cluster API Tinkerbell providers, approach on updates and upgrades, and if you guys have thought of it. I was looking at cluster API and it looks like they mostly support rolling updates, which is like if you have the machines that will deploy newer machines with the updated or upgraded things, and then it will clean out the older ones. But it sounds like that might not be the best approach for bare metal, because then you'll have to add more hardware. And if it's like a huge cluster, you'll need as many nodes again just for updating and or upgrading, whatever. So I was just wondering if you guys have any thoughts on this or have thought about like in-place upgrades for cluster API Tinkerbell providers.
Yeah, so definitely. Cluster API itself doesn't really support in-place upgrades on existing hardware for a few different reasons. There's the whole idea is that each machine is treated immutably. So, when you go to upgrade, you replace it with another machine. Ideally, the environment would have a little bit of slack to support upgrades. Right now, there's configuration that you can do. The control plane's upgraded one at a time right now. So in the default configuration, it would surge one additional machine as part of the upgrade process. And the machine deployments can be configured to surge various different amounts as well. But you can also configure it for a scale in first type upgrade, which is a little more dangerous on potential impact to quorum of etcd as part of the upgrade, but that gets you out of the I need more hardware than I'm provisioning type of scenario. I hope that helps a little bit. And I see Nicholas has a question, but I want to make sure that I've answered your question, Abhinav.
Yeah, just so you said we can do something like upgrade one node at a time. So will that only require like just one additional node for updating, or is that just for control plane itself? And then
so
we'll need more.
I think in the default configuration, it'll scale up just one at a time, both on the control plane and the machine deployment side. If you absolutely have to, you configure them so that they will scale down first. And I'm working on, well, no, that's not related. I'm working on things with our Equinix Metal provider for cluster API that enables the test suite. We still need to figure out how do we automate a test suite around cluster API provider Tinkerbell. But if we get that, when we do get that automated, the upstream cluster API end-to-end test suite includes tests for both the scale up and the scale in upgrade deployment models.
Got it. Makes sense. Thanks.
Yep.
I think you answered my question with these like two upgrade strategies, and because like I was reading into cluster API a bit, and there was one that was recommended, and I don't know which one it was.
Oh yeah, it's definitely recommended to do the scale up approach, because it's if something goes wrong, you're not in a situation to where you potentially reduce the failure tolerance of your etcd cluster. So if you're scaling up from 3 to 4, you have a tolerance of losing 2 etcd machines before quorum is lost. you're not going down. Whereas if you scale from 3 to 2, now you only have a tolerance of one failure, and the entire cluster is kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of borked at that stage,
Makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Right on. Any other thoughts or comments, questions around that? Sweet. Thanks, Abhinav. All right. Discussions. We do have one item for discussion that showed up. Let's see. Let me post the link into the Zoom chat here. This came up in our triage party board. This is for a proposal around default workflows. If you haven't read this ticket, I highly recommend, but I think that if I can maybe give a general idea, there's some interest in having unknown machines be inventoried, for lack of a better term, into Tinkerbell without having to pre-existingly have a record in there for it. And I think there might have been a little bit of work started across a couple repos. And also, if I'm not mistaken, this individual got pulled away and wasn't able to keep pushing this forward, but there was a tag of discuss put on this just last week. So any thoughts or opinions or comments around default workflows?
I think it's a really cool feature. It's something that I would also really, really like, because yeah, it would make a lot of the automation a lot easier, because you would get automatic MAC address management on all these kind of things. Because especially when you work, I mean, I work a lot with Raspberry Pis, and getting the MAC addresses out of them means, okay, I need to manually boot them up, write it down, then I can only provision it, which doesn't really scale well. So I think it would be nice to have a default workflow that either enrolls them by automatic hardware discovery, but I mean, you can build your own thing. That's the beauty of it, right?
One of the points of possible contention, since this is only like a loose proposal right now, or maybe there's something in the proposal that dealt with this directly, but decoupling the idea of registration from a default workflow, I think, is helpful. That registration can be yet another workflow, and a default workflow can enable auto registration. So yeah, if the proposal that was created long ago is defunct, do we actually have like a PR with a full design proposal, or is this just a stub that says this is something that we should do and figure out?
Yeah, good question. I thought there was a PR in Boots that started some of this. I'm searching here real quick. It might have been closed. Yeah, there it is. So PR 179, I'll post in the chat here. This was in Boots, but it got closed out. Yeah, this is where this individual, Blecky 06, William Belcher, it looks like, he commented that he was in the middle of university studies and he couldn't take this on. It looks like I closed it. So yeah, there was a little bit of work, but yeah, defunct kind of to the wayside. Personally, I think that's the biggest hindrance right now, is just somebody throw anything out, right? I think there's been lots of talks. I think people are interested, and if somebody throws a PR and can kind of push through some of the difficulties that brings up, we could probably get closer to
that. One thing regarding documentation and kind of the whole structure of things, I know the documentation repository is currently separate. Is some of the documentation automatically pulled into the documentation repository, like for example from the sandbox?
No, I'm not aware of any of that.
Not today, but we could potentially do that. But, you know, somebody would have to work with like Mara, who does a lot of the documentation work on our side, to how do we enable that to be able to pull from, you know, the external sources and incorporate that in the documentation. We had a quick chat about it, you know, a while back in one of the community meetings and within the channel, and there's interest to do it. It's just a matter of, you know, getting it done, I think.
Because I mean, it should in theory just be grinding it if we pull all the documentation out of the sandbox, for example, just by hand, and then dump it into the docs repository, and then maybe put in like each of the subfolders for Terraform, just a link to that, like to the general Tinkerbell website, or where it will end up, like a deep link. Because like that way we're kind of forced then to always update the documentation in the docs repository, which is a little bit more maintenance overhead, but also makes sure that the documentation is always in one place and up to date. So there's less drift.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Also, sorry, a small disclaimer. So I'm currently unemployed. So whenever you need some workforce, I'm more than happy to contribute. Because yeah, well, I have plenty of time.
Right on. Appreciate the offer. Sweet. Any other thoughts or questions, comments around default workflows? Yep.
Marquez, when you meant, sorry if I mispronounced your name.
That's fine.
When you meant like separating the default workflow from the registration, like how were you thinking? Because I think I don't understand.
And I think I was speaking from past conversations, but there was the notion that machines that come onto the network for the first time would get detected in some way and like assigned a default workflow. And I stated a perspective that I'm linking to it, I think. And I'm not sure if that's the exact conversation there, but that we can keep those two ideas of registration and a default workflow, we can keep them separate. We could make a registration system. So this is the auto discovery or registration. When a machine shows up on your network for the first time and it somehow gets into this whole DHCP, it's responded to in some way. And that's maybe a problem on its own. Like, does our DHCP want to respond to things that it doesn't recognize? But if it does respond to something that has not already been registered in the Tinkerbell hardware, and it receives some default workflow, then that default workflow could be one that allows it to register. There's probably all kinds of questions with how that works, how we give a anonymous machine or an unrecognized machine some sort of access to the Tinkerbell APIs. But in any case, I think that they're two separate issues and we can address them separately. The matter of discovery and registration and the matter of default workflows.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it makes sense. Because like I'm very curious about this whole thing, because there was like one, I like to call them crazy ideas that I halfway start in my private GitHub, where I wanted to do basically software-defined networking with custom resources in Kubernetes, kind of that you define a fabric, and then this fabric would either be implemented via well, net plan and NF tables or something like that. And then as part of this, as part of the fabric, you could kind of have a Tinkerbell plugin that would automatically then provision the Tinkerbell stack. And on this particular subnet, then you would have to just connect instances and they would automatically get enrolled in everything. And the idea with this project was then to like also take software-defined networking controller in Kubernetes to the level where I bought some SNMP switches and stuff because I wanted to play around with it. And the idea was that, yeah, basically then you can have a controller that spawns kind of like drivers that then reconcile your switches based on the fabric. So you could say, okay, well, this is the network path towards this network segment, and then it would reconcile. So you would basically just high-level define fabrics in Kubernetes, and yeah, then it would reconcile the switches and network hardware that you have based on custom resources. And in this regard, it would be very, very nice to have this enrollment and registration in place, because that would just mean, okay, I just spawn a Tinkerbell stack and then I'm good to go. I have my own yeah, bare metal provisioning cloud, just like that.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think defining some of these terms will be key to how we solve them too. So like I think from my perspective, I think there's a few nuanced differences between the ideas of like hardware discovery, default workflow registration. There's some interesting nuances. So it might be interesting to, or might be key to define some of these very clearly and say, this is exactly what I'm going after. Because yeah, how you call it, what is a default workflow, right? What are the constraints? Is there a hardware resource already in existence, a non-hardware resource? How do you interact with some of those kind of nuances, I think will be key to helping us push any of these ideas forward, I think.
Comparing how the last proposal was created, where it was just a PR against boots, and comparing that to the Kubernetes proposal that Micah had created for that one started with a pretty thorough design doc. That's the approach to take here, to come up with a design doc first. Don't just come up with like a PR. The PR is the backup to the design doc. It it illustrates the point, but we need to go through that design doc first, figure out what these nuanced terms, how they should be applied, how they fit in with how everybody sees Tinkerbell evolving, and make sure that we're not boxing ourselves in. So yeah, start with a design doc in the proposals if this is something that you're interested in pursuing, or if anybody's interested in pursuing it. I think it was called out in the GitHub issue as something to bring up in the community, because just through Triage Party, I think there was a January 3rd comment that hasn't gone answered in the issue 178.
Yeah,
I was tagged in it, but I was only tagged as like reference.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, somebody made a comment. That's fair.
Well, this is the discussion. We should probably follow up with a Triage comment, but maybe you want to, if you're super interested, Nicholas, you could just like comment on the issue, say, yeah, I'm gonna come up with a design proposal. I just throw a bunch of work at you.
Yeah, that's fine. I just need to find the PR again.
Yeah, it's in the Zoom. It's the second link from the bottom.
Yeah, 178. Yeah.
If you're looking for examples of, what to do in the design doc, take a look at. Let's find Micah's design.
It's I think proposals repository, right?
Yeah. Yeah, proposal, the last one that's in the directories. It's a pretty thorough example. I don't know if I think this is a pretty this would be a topic that warrants a thorough exploration. So it's probably a good example to follow, just to make sure that you're kind of hitting all the same sections and detail level. Completely unrelated. In our docs, we have the verbiage goals and not goals. I don't know why it's not goals. I would think that's non-goals, but
Oh, really?
we live with it. We live with not goals.
That never even dawned on me. That's funny. Yeah, definitely not goals doesn't seem right. Cool. All right, any other, there's like 5 minutes left. Any other topics or questions or things to bring up?
Just a small question. Can I poke you, Jacob, if I like want some review and some PRs? Is that fine?
Yeah, 100%. Feel free.
Cool.
Thank you. Awesome. All right. So next week, same time, same channel, triage party. If y'all are interested, or if you're checking this out later on the web, every other Tuesday is triage party. Yeah, thanks y'all for showing up. Appreciate the discussions. See y'all online.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jacob.